Okay, so since this is about project work, let me start with an example of a project that I completed with my students. The previous year, we were all in a lockdown situation here in Poland, and students stayed at home, and we conducted classes 100% online. And we've been doing so for the past 3 semesters, as a matter of fact, or 2.5. This semester, we're planning to go back to regular classes, but we never know. But one of those benefits of the situation was that people, almost everybody, tested and tried online education. And in many cases, except for the disadvantages of that, which is usually people refer to being tired, overloaded, fed up with screen time and similar, one of the advantages of that is that you can think about education internationally, not only locally, but you can reach out to students from all over the world. And these exchanges, and I think that this webinar is also an example of such an exchange, are really great. Yeah, you learn a lot, you experience a lot, and you think about education as something which is not only your classroom, your school, the town, the place where you live, but also something that's connecting. Okay, so in this way, I do advise, or I do recommend taking some of my ideas and using them on your own with your students. And here is the first one: project work and task-based learning. So take a look at this screen, and I'm going to share with you a sample of the real exercise I conducted with my students the past year, a year ago. And this was about local tourism. Since we were in this lockdown and students stayed at home, the groups almost never formed. They met like once or twice before we went into lockdown. I wanted them to explore local places and local attractions, and I wanted them to share these with other students in the group. So I created this project for them. I called it Local Tourism, here on screen, and I wanted them to find out something interesting around the places where they live. And I put it into this description, in which I made them business entrepreneurs so that they could create a company in this hospitality or tourism industry, offering visits to local places nearby. So that was the idea behind this project. So look what is it that I asked them to do. I told them these attractions that you'll be presenting in your business should be accessible within like up to 3 hours of travel from each other, so quite close. If you get into the car and you drive there, if you're traveling by bike or any other means of transportation, this should be within easy reach from the place where you are, where you live. I put people into groups, so I asked them to work in groups of 3 or 4. Take a look here, yeah, and I put the project into stages so that they knew exactly what to do in order to complete the task, in order to complete the project. So in stage 1 of this work, they were to create teams, so like form the company. They were to think about the name and the logo of this company and to prepare it a bit more professionally. In stage 2, I asked them to put together the offer, but the offer of the business was to be presented in a website. So look how advanced it gets at this very moment. People, learners, need to think about local attractions which may be interesting for visitors from around. The offer needs to be presented in the form of a website. This website, as you can read in stage 2 description, should include photos and video material presenting these attractions. And video material should be video presentations with attractions in it, which describe these video presentations, benefits of visiting these attractions. So look, quite intensive, right? what they also needed to do was they needed to prepare written descriptions of the attractions with photos. Now, you can imagine the complexity of that. The question that I spotted, how long did it take? Semester work. So we were meeting once a week, but we didn't really work on this project in class, I mean online, yeah, because it was all done online. They were working on it along our regular classes. So with this project, I opted for the particular approach. I said, no homework. We will be working on projects somewhat connected to our regular topics that we'll be covering during the semester. And you work on the project work along our regular course book materials. If you want to know how many hours it took them to complete that, I did something that I almost always do after project or task-based learning classes with my students. There is this moment of reflection after the project's been completed, and I ask students for feedback. And one of the questions I ask them about is this one: how many hours did it take you to complete the work? And in here, people working in groups of 3 or 4, they reported about 10 to 16 hours of work, quite a lot of things that they did. But look, they did the website, they went to visit these local attractions, they checked what they looked like, they recorded videos, they put it into a website offer, loads of work, yeah? And then finally, at the end of the semester's work, they presented. Each group, each team had 10, 12 minutes to present the website. Later on, all the other groups were checking the websites on their own. And when we were in the project, they were also doing some review and feedback sessions, consulting other students about the progress. But that's what it was like. So when I'm presenting this document to you, I'm showing you something that my students actually looked at and were working on the basis of the description that I've given to them. It's quite detailed, but that's actually how you create something what you would normally call a lesson plan for project work. The components here may vary. You may decide about many things on your own, depending on the level of your students and depending on the aims and goals. My goal, I wanted to make them learn about English for the hospitality industry, give them a chance to discover local interesting places, hoping that through this exercise, the group, which is isolated because of the pandemics and studying online, will get to know more about other people from the group and will get to know more about the places. Okay, so I'll show you an example of the work. This is one of the websites that I created. The website created by one group of students. That's what it looks like. It went live, so it's on the internet. You can actually visit it. It has the material here. The video, as you can see, is somewhere here in the background, embedded into the website. And by the way, these are not like ICT programming, coding students. They're just regular people who study, in this case, French language, right? The descriptions are here. Loads of photos, loads of multimedia material. You can click to read about the offer of the trip. You can check even the map, how they imagine this particular trip. There are loads of active attractions like rock climbing, cycling, horse riding in it, sightseeing as well. There's a beautiful gallery with loads of pictures of these very places. So, my students went and took photos in here. All right, so that's one. There is another one. This group went for something like that. It's kind of spooky tour. Look, they want to get closer to paranormal activities, yeah? And they want the clients to try this on their own. And they created a trip of around 3 places with, again, photos, description, video material, which you can preview here. So I'm going to be showing you everything, but just a bit of that. Yeah, remember it should be spooky, so there are ghosts in it. And well, you know, that's just a sample of that, of the material and the work. So now you can imagine how intensive it's been. Okay, all right. So that's a sample of project work with the document showing how to set it up and how to organize it when you're communicating with students, with some samples of students' achievement and work in this particular project. So really intensive, loads of work involved in this, and at the same time, quite rewarding. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to explain, to kind of break it down into stages and tell you how to do it and why do it. So what's behind project work and task-based learning? My inspiration for using project work in teaching is this particular quotation. Take a look. This is from Roger Lewin, a British book writer. He says the following thing: too often we give children answers to remember rather than problems to solve. And I guess personally for me, this real innovation in education. This perspective and this modification of the approach to teaching. Polish educational system, if you think about primary school, secondary school, any level of education, involves a lot of memorization, rote learning, learning by heart, exams, closed-ended questions, you know, all these things for which you really need to prepare intensively. And then you take this examination, hopefully you pass it, you get a grade and you can forget. But the modification that Roger proposes is the one which actually, I think, is the most beautiful thing about education. It's quite natural to give people tasks, to require them to experiment, to give them space for thinking. And that's what project work and task work does. Okay, so what's the difference between projects and task? Because I'm talking about these, I'm using these two words. They're quite similar, and both of these, project and task, they have a lot of research. There is a lot of research and a lot of history behind them. And you can actually study methodology in detail. If you want a definition which shows the real beauty behind project work, here it is. And what it says is exactly what Roger said in this previous quotation, the previous slide that I've shown. Look, this is a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills, so they learn, by working over an extended period of time to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or challenge. So these are the things that happened in my project. I gave them quite a challenging task. It was authentic because it talked about the places nearby. The idea for the business that they were to create is something that they may be it's quite closely related to possibly their future lives, as employees later on. It was engaging on many different levels, thinking about their motivation, thinking about the number of tasks and activities they had to complete in order to do it. Learning happens while people are working on this project. In here, unlike during standard, let's call it standard traditional teaching, learning is almost invisible sometimes. This is the time which students spend reading online, checking things online, investigating, discussing, analyzing, thinking about, deciding, disagreeing about to reach a conclusion. This is this process. What we very often see and concentrate on in any form of learning is only the end product, the result of the test, or maybe the presentation. In here, it's the whole process which matters. So this is the project-based learning. What about task-based learning? Well, it's quite similar. The difference is that it's more, let's say, simple to organize task-based learning activities because the task is critical there. The task could be like here, calling customer service for help, or conducting an interview, or visiting a doctor. So it's kind of staged more than the project that I've presented. But actually, in reality, people use both. Both of these terms interchangeably, and I do as well, because projects can be by definition really challenging and too difficult for some students, for some levels especially, and tasks may be too simple, just like typical production tasks at the end of a course book. There is nothing wrong at the end of a lesson in a course book. There's nothing wrong with that, but I found the mix of both the best. So I create projects which have elements of tasks in them, because in this description of a project, I steal from the task description stages and details of requirements towards what my students should do. Yeah? Some people say that the main difference between project-based learning and task-based learning is about the time invested into it. I agree. Projects take more time. Tasks can be really short, really brief. I will show you in a moment an example of a task which takes 20 minutes to complete, maybe even less. Projects require more review meetings with your students, with the groups. And that's cool, because during these meetings, so in a practical sense, in an online reality, I meet my students once in like 2 weeks, once twice a month or so, depending on the mode of work and how often we work. We set up a conference room for that, and each group meets me for a couple of minutes just to check on what they've done in the past week or 2 weeks. So these review stages happen more often. In a task, you don't really need too many of those, because the task controls the work. Okay, so that would be the difference. So some examples. Here is a task. Think about your learners, and what do you think? And you can use the chat box to tell me. If the task is the following: design your ideal learning space. Think about the students you teach. Would they be able to complete such a task? Design your ideal learning space. Think about the age group. Think about the level of English. What language do they need to complete this task? So my question to you is the following: primary school kids, would they be able to design their ideal learning space? Please use the chat box to say yes or no, too difficult for my students, or okay, they can do that. All right, so loads of yeses, some, yeah, difficult. It depends exactly. If you think about the practical skills that students need for that, and this description is that's the following thing. What language do they need? Learning space. I guess they need some basic names of furniture. They might also need propositions of place, yeah, like the shelf is above the desk. I have my speakers next to my computer screen, these things. So quite a simple, I would say A2 level type of a task. But look, it is quite unique in terms of the end product. Each student or each pair or each group might produce a different ideal learning space, ideal for them. Now, would you like to complete such a task? Yeah, what would your ideal learning space or working space look like? Yeah, that's the question. And the moment I started thinking about it, this is actually something I took off the internet. So I'm just going to use this as one of the first tasks I'm going to give to my students this semester. And I love it. The idea is great. But you need to go a bit beyond the desk and the environment of a room. What I see here is the ideal learning space on some, like the top of the mountain, where you can really, maybe not the top of the mountain, by the lake with no mosquitoes, of course, where you can really relax and you can really focus and you can really concentrate, and it's quiet and it's pristine and serene in many ways. Yeah, this will be my ideal learning space. Okay, so look, now if you think about this task, design, what do I mean by this? What do you understand behind design? Because I understand for A2 primary school kids, design as a drawing, maybe, yeah? So drawing is there. And then a bit of a description of what's where, and that will do. But for, let's say, B2 secondary school students, I understand something a bit more advanced, right? They could compare. They could do more than draw. They could probably design something using some computer ICT tools, some apps that they might find, yeah? Okay, look, I'll show you a modification of this task. Take a look here. We focus on the same concept of learning space, ideal learning space again. We now look at schools and work environments. So again, just this very simple modification of this one sentence takes this task from 20-minute long exercise to, I guess, 2 hours of work, maybe 3 hours of work for secondary school students at possibly B2, B1 level. Now, why? Because in here, once people have conducted some online research, once they have found best work environment, best school learning space, they can compare, they can present, they can describe, they can agree, they can disagree. They have more, they can do much more than people with the first task. And I'll show you the third one, which is, I guess, even more challenging. And the third one is like a typical project. Look. Okay, look, this one is really advanced and a lot of work is involved in here. That's something I would call a project that can take half a semester, yeah? Learning needs, what are learning needs? So people need to investigate that first. They need to find out what learning needs are. They need to design a survey. Okay, so how do you design a survey? This survey should be organized online. So they need tools for surveys online. I don't know, maybe Google Forms or something similar. They need to collect information. So they need to conduct some kind of interviews, maybe poll people. They need to identify trends. I mean, this one is much more complicated, but it started with a very simple idea of an ideal learning space. So look, by modifying the idea of, behind the project or behind the task, you can reach different students, different levels, different ages, right? So that's the amazing thing about project work, that only with an idea, which may somewhat be based on a unit that you're working on with your students in a course book. So take, let's say, natural environment, standard thing. You may go to almost any level and you may work with almost any age group. And I have not mentioned one thing. There is something missing in these three. And, they are kind of beginnings of project work description. And the project work description needs detailed description. The kind of in the style that I've presented to you at the beginning. So like 1 page or maybe even more of text. And this is essential because your students really need to know exactly what to do. If with the first one, design your ideal learning space, okay, because students' involvement will be about 20 minutes to 45 minutes, you don't really need to do too much because you can manage it during one session with your students. But anything that takes more than one meeting during which you can provide feedback, you can answer questions, needs to be well described in a written form. And that's my top tip for any type of project-based learning or task-based learning. Online or offline, do create a document, okay, where you describe standards and what students should do. In other words, students need to know what end product, what result you want them to produce. And here are some examples of these end products. And I said that this is missing in the description from this previous slide, from this one here, right here, yeah. Because now think about the next step. Once you know what you want your students to do, for example, here, the goal is to practice with these learning spaces, to practice, for example, prepositions of place, to practice furniture, to practice, I don't know, asking questions through a survey, right? Or writing descriptions or creating comparisons or agreeing, disagreeing when you want to have a debate, which solution we should try to implement at school. Once you know what you want to do, thinking about the language, you need to think how to into what kind of an exercise or a task to put it. Because, yeah, if you want your students to write a piece of text about it, then of course the skills involved will be different than if you want them to record some video where they, I don't know, visit a place, yeah, or where you want them to create a drawing with kind of poster-like or a sketch-like drawing, which you can display later on, for example, on the corridor or on a website of the school, where other students vote to choose the ideal learning space. Maybe you could actually take it to the headmaster of the school and make them build something like that for, a sample working space as a result of the project. So in other words, the product, the end product, the result of the work is something that definitely needs to be well described so that your students know what you want them to do. All right, so you specify, I want you to create a ranking list of 3 best learning spaces you found on the internet with a piece of text, 5 sentences, explaining why this is the best one, why this is number 2, why this is number 3, okay? Or I want you to print out a poster with description of why this is your ideal learning space. And we will hang it on the wall somewhere there, and we will be voting or looking or admiring or comparing. Yeah? The end product needs to be well described. Okay, now there are many different examples of the result of students' work, and I'll show you more later on. But look what happens here. All of these products, many of them go beyond what students can do at this very moment. I guess your students are not good at building websites. Most of them probably aren't. They may not be good at writing poems. They may not be good at maybe drawing. They may be bad, or they may have never done any proper video, especially if it's to be edited, right? This goes beyond the standard skills that they might have, primary school, secondary school kids. And here I need to kind of give you the main warning, motivation. When you tell students and create a website where you present, the students say, what, a website? I've got no idea how to build a website, right? Okay, so that's this thing connected to motivation. Can they build websites? Well, yes, they can. There are tools online which you can use that you can build websites with no coding involved in like 15 minutes. That's the beauty of the computer age we live in. But actually, when you think about a problem or when you think about a tool, you Google it and it's there. We can talk about website building later on. But what I'm telling you is that do not worry about it. The task needs to be challenging, okay? It needs to be something new. Because if you think about these critical components of a task or a project, this number 3, I would say, is the most important. A task or a project has a clearly defined non-linguistic outcome, result, product. It goes beyond the language use. And that's the contrary to what you might expect from a project. That's the most important thing about it. Why? Because it makes the project very often authentic. It makes the product different than just learning for the sake or doing a task for the sake of the correctness and the key. It means that you will actually involve people with their gifts, talents, skills, which go beyond the classroom set of skills you might imagine they should have once leaving or entering your classroom there, online or offline again. Yeah. So this clearly defined non-linguistic outcome needs to be there. Okay. It makes it really authentic. It very often makes it meaningful. When you've created a website with the result of whatever you've been working on in this project, it has some meaning. It's very often almost like tangible effect of your work. You can show it to other people. You can present it. You can discuss it. You're proud of it. It's online. You're doing it not only for the teacher or satisfaction of completing a task. It's public. Yeah, it's beyond the classroom. You're making a stamp on the world. So that's why this authenticity and this meaningfulness is so important in the task, and that's why it makes it so much different. Okay, we'll talk about motivation in a moment. I'll show you a couple of other things there. First of all, in a task or in a project, you need to concentrate on meaning, not on form. It's just like with communicative language teaching, yeah? Meaning, the message is more important than the form. Why? You can work on the form later on or before you start project work. So the accuracy will be taken care of later or before, but there is really no need to push for perfection in this sense. If people make mistakes, let them make mistakes. You can collect mistakes later and organize a crash course into any particular problem that you've identified in the grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, or any other thing during this project work. But during evaluation, let them make mistakes. Let them give them space for that at least, okay? And by the way, I need to tell you that we're not going to talk about assessing and grading of project work. There's a separate seminar for it, which is going to take care of that because it's actually such a big thing that it deserves a separate webinar. Okay, all right. So there are actually two ways of approaching project work or task-based learning. If you think about how to put it into your classes, the one which is most popular, the one that I use, the one that I recommend, is an add-on, project as an add-on to the course. So that's what I do. I run a regular class, and in some hybrid way, I invite people, I make students, complete projects. And depending on the class, on the course, or intensity, or number of hours, different things, I decide how much of it happens in class, online, and how much of it happens when students work outside of class or outside of the, or on their own with other students. Yeah, you will decide on your own. It may be about practical approach to teaching. For example, do we give homework or not? Do we want to give homework or not? It's sometimes about control over students' work. Yeah? Okay. And if you think about the theory of task-based learning or project-based learning, this is called the weak form of task-based learning. Why? Because there is some priming and preparation of students to complete the task. I'll show you how in a second. The next possible way of doing that is teaching entirely through project-based learning or task-based learning. But I don't think it's if you're new to it, no, not really if you're new. If you want to do it, great. I did it once in my life. I remodeled the whole semester's class to be actually taught through project-based learning and task-based learning. We ditched course books, everything. That was like loads of work, and I needed different permissions from supervisors, and so I don't really recommend it. Although it's a beautiful thing to actually be able to do that. Yeah, if you live in a system, educational system or environment, maybe private schools, maybe some other systems where this is okay, I would recommend it because this is like the real innovation in education. Okay, so this is called strong form, yeah, of project work and task-based learning. You can of course create a mix of these depending on, again, on the situation, on where you work and how you work. Okay, so look, these two, strong form, weak form. What's the difference? In practical terms, the weak form has one cool advantage. It's something that we are more used to. Look, there are three stages of working on a task or a project. First, you present it, of course, to students. So you just read this document, the description, try to make them engaged and interested in the task. And in the strong form, you assume that once you've given the task, it actually goes on under the control of your students. You don't really intervene much. They need to, your learners even need to choose appropriate language for the project work. So for example, if you want them to design ideal learning space and they don't know words connected to furniture, they have to learn these words themselves. In a weak form, project or task, which goes along standard unit course book, is somewhat this last P in the PPP lesson plan, if you know this one, yeah? Presentation, practice, production. So that would be the production stage. It can go at the end of a lesson, at the end of a unit, along it, and it's perfect because it's meaningful, it is authentic, it is motivating, engaging, and it goes beyond the the standard. So that would be this weak form. And the advantage is that students are actually prepared because you've already done presentation and practice, and now they have the language, they know these words connected to, let's say, furniture or prepositions of place. They have the language to use to complete the project or the task. Okay, so in the next stage, in the task stage, they work. They complete the task, and look what happens. You become an observer, you counsel, you monitor, you support, you motivate, but you don't do the work for them, right? And that's the critical thing in the project work. If they make mistakes, great. Let them make mistakes. They will have time to revise. They will have time to fix problems. You're not to help them fix these problems, yeah? You may point to some problems, or actually in project work or in task-based learning, when they stumble upon a problem, that's great. When it makes them stop and think, that's wonderful. When they don't know what to do, that's even better. They have to be independent. Of course, you know, younger students need a bit more guidance and a bit more support from you. Sometimes even, you know, direct help. And I would just say yes, do it, yeah, especially at the beginning. But older students need a bit of encouragement, motivation, asking the right question. So for example, you have this problem here? Okay, so maybe talk to the group and brainstorm the problem to arrive at some solutions. Okay, or maybe, all right, have you checked the internet? So for example, so you don't know how to create a website. Have you checked the internet? Offer them support, but don't solve problems for them during the work. And finally, the product, yeah? The presentation of the product. What will it be? How will people present it? Okay, there is a cycle to it. If you want to, you can take a look at this cycle of work. It's very similar to what I've described. You present, teams form, they propose how they will go about the project. They will discuss it with you, and then they work. In the work, you can have those milestones, like, you know, the critical moments, stages, and then you review these with them. Finally, there is the presentation of the end product, which then has evaluation session or reflection session, critical moments in project work, just to show what they've learned. And if you feel that it's like a lot of work because you look like this lady run over by a truck, well, it is a lot of work. And that's why I suggest that if you're new to task-based learning and project in your classroom, try with something simple, something that will take 2 weeks of work for your students. Okay, now, as I mentioned, I mix projects and tasks a bit in this sense that I always clearly define expectations towards the end product, these standards. I do it so that my students always work towards the same end product or the same goal, yeah? And I think this is the right approach for beginners. In this sense that if your students, just like you, might be new to project work, give them something that they can relate to easily or compare in between groups, okay? So create a checklist of how many sentences they have to have in the description, how simple or how many photos, how long the video should be. It's really helpful. And you know that some people want to do like the bare minimum, but they can deliver what you expect them to do. Okay, now for me, the kind of the most beautiful thing about project work and task-based learning is that it goes beyond the language, beyond the language skills. It makes people work on those 4 C's: critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, communication, and they develop these skills. They are called 21st century skills. And this is something that is actually more important than knowledge nowadays. If you're good at communication with other people, if you're good at collaboration, you'll be a perfect team member. If you're good at critical thinking and creativity, you will solve problems, yeah? So that's what we want our learners to be like, rather than being perfect at knowing loads of words or being perfect at grammar. Yeah, there is always time for it. Here are 2 slides which I'm going to skip to prove that project-based learning works. But the most beautiful thing about it is when you change this approach to teaching, as I've said at the beginning, your classes, these projects make your classes learner-centered, really. Why? Because you simply forget about the model, or there is even no space for the model where you're the master and the knowledge bearer to your students, and they are they take the role of the apprentice who listens. They do things, they try, they experiment, they make mistakes, and that's the beautiful thing in it. That's this old classroom, where people listen to you and they forget immediately. And that's the new classroom where these are actually my students pre-pandemic's time. These are those people who work in teams, who communicate, who collaborate, who fail, who don't know how to do, who laugh, who make mistakes quite often. And I love it in this thing. It's so natural and it's so lively and it's so engaging for them. For me as well, because it's just, there's nothing more rewarding for me personally as a teacher than to see my students proud of what they have achieved, especially, which very often happens with the project work, especially that at the beginning, when I explained what they need to do, they say, how? I don't know. I've never written a poem in my life. Yeah. And then at the end of the task, they see this, the fruit of the work being beautiful. Okay, learner-centered instruction, teacher-centered instruction, I guess you know things about it, yeah? But in my opinion, it's always good to reflect on your class, on your teaching, to check if you're getting towards learner-centered instruction, because then you get this, this reward of your students doing things, right? This is the classroom which is bustling with noise, loud. People talk, they move, and it's beautiful, yeah? Okay. A couple of tips. Again, I mentioned that already. Start with a simple, short project, something that will take 2 weeks, not more. Plan the work of a bit for your students and with your students. Who works with whom? I suggest that at the beginning, again, they chose the partners. They choose the partners. Think about communication online. What do? Do you meet every week to discuss a bit? Do you give them special, consultation hours for that? Do you communicate using emails or some kind of, instant messaging systems? My tip here is plan the work and always have someone report to you on what they have done, what they have achieved. And it's really good to do it in writing. Yeah, it makes it visible and it makes people think, okay, what have I done? What do I put into the chart of this weekly progress on my project work? Think about evaluation, which is important because you need to tell your students how they'll be evaluated, which aspects of the work will be evaluated. And likewise, prepare the presentation. Motivation for your students. I told you that there will be moments when they're going to say, I don't know how to do it. It's too difficult, right? Your task here is to give them encouragement, give them feedback, tell them, okay, try something different, talk to your group, solve the problem together. If, again, they are younger learners, you may guide them a bit more. Yeah? You may show them some tools, some ideas, some solution. At the beginning, just like I told you with this ideal learning space, almost everybody starts thinking about the desk and the bed or whatever you've got nearby. But when you think about creatively, right? When you think beyond the standard, for example, okay, this top of the mountain, this forest, this park, any place, or maybe 3 places that you can teleport yourself from one to another, depending on, if it has to be online or not, intensive or relaxing working space. Give them this idea that they can really go beyond the standard. Okay, presentation of the end product. This is critical. You need to make people rehearse, really, before they present. It's like, it's the fundamental thing that helps them see in the end product something more than just presentation and then we forget. It makes them realize that presentation is the last step. the rehearsal for the presentation is more important very often than the presentation itself. So I'll give you another tip that I use with my students. And I usually surprise them with that. I'm not sure if it's good or not, but I surprise them like that. They come to class, we have a deadline for presentation, and I ask them if they're ready. And half of the group says, yes, we're ready. Half of them say, no, we're not. So I tell them, okay, so I want you to rehearse. And I put the groups together and they rehearse, like group A to group B, group C to group D, and then they try again. And then a week after, we meet for the final presentation in front of the whole class, online or offline, yeah. And they say, all right, it's so much better after this first time we've tried it, yeah. So you can use this tip as well, because it's helping. You don't want to surprise your students, you don't want to prove to your students that they don't know or they have forgotten. No, you want to make sure that they have enough time, enough confidence, because they got feedback from peers, from you, so that they are ready for the big day, let's say. Okay, so that's motivation. And instead of this standard carrot and stick extrinsic motivation or interesting motivation, which is quite difficult to work on, I suggest you introduce something that is called agency into this work. Agency is when your students become agents, meaning like doers, because they work with meaningful tasks. They create something that is really there, the website, the poem, the project. So they can show that, they can prove that they've done it, right? Very important concept in connection to motivation. You can read more about it later on if you're interested, but it goes so beyond standard skills. Feedback in project work should simply be offered often, especially at the beginning, so that students know that they are working in the right direction. They need this reassurance from you. Okay, some examples of these here, which you can explore later on your own, are examples of websites which have loads of projects and tasks. You put these into Google and you add the word project or task, and you will have websites with filters with hundreds of these. So I'm not going to go through these because I think that's up to you to decide if you want to. And ICT, of course, learning management systems. I'm not sure what you're on, but if you've been teaching online, then you definitely need to have something. If you don't have a proper, an LMS such as Teams, Google Classroom, Moodle, Edmodo, simplest, easiest to use, totally for free, looks a bit like Facebook. So it's great for everybody who doesn't have an LMS to start. And here are my top tools that you could use. I use Flipgrid sometimes. This is like if you have young students and they are not allowed to use YouTube or something else, Flipgrid allows people to post video messages and comment on them and give feedback on this and so on. Padlet, I think, which is everybody knows Padlet in this sense that this is a space where people can share materials and work. Trello is an very advanced app for managing project work. This is something that you could use with I could use with my peers designing project and working on these, and it's professional, but for free. So you can, if you have secondary school kids, you can already start experimenting with that. It will make it easier for them to work later. Yes, and for collaboration, that's the last thing I wanted to say. Please try this thing. eTwinning is a European Union project, but if you go to the website, you find loads of ideas for project work. And the best thing is you can find particular teachers and schools all around Europe. And even outside of eTwinning website, you can email the teachers and you can say, hi, I'm interested in collaboration. Could we do something collaborating? My school, yours, my class, your class. And I guess they will agree. If you need something different, there is something for universities called Uni Collaboration, for everybody, ePols also for projects. So look, my idea is the following. Think about education differently. Give people, your students, a chance to try and test this tiny little innovation in education, which says, do something different, do something difficult, challenging, and check how creative you may be, how interesting collaboration and communication is. Challenge them to think critically about work, about material, about information they find online. Teach them how to use what they find online to make the projects even better and more interesting. And finally, the last word from me for you, as if take one of those ideas that I've presented. I think they're quite good and quite simple to start. For example, this one about local tourism, or this one about the learning space. Yeah, I like it a lot. I think I'm going to use it because it's so realistic and so for everybody. And test it on your students, see how they react, and really accept almost everything that they do, as long as they go, above the bare minimum, just to give them this award, this motivational boost of, wow, you're great at, for example, drawing, not only propositions of place. Propositions of place, that's just a tool, English language becomes a tool to succeed later on at almost any context of, academic success, professional success. I think we need to start teaching people now that they can solve problems, that they can complete tasks, even if they seem to be daunting and challenging. Thank you very much for this session. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. So please let me know if there's anything I should talk about now. I'll stop my screen sharing here.
Great, Lukasz. Thank you so much for a really entertaining session, inspiring session, but I think above all, very practical. And you can see all the love in the chat box.
Thank you very much.
Lots of practical ideas. I've picked up a few questions for you, if you are okay with me asking them. First of all, of course, there will be challenges for us teachers when we start doing this, right? Thinking about anticipated problems, are there any challenges in the online environment we teachers need to be aware of when we start project-based learning online?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the one which people quite often forget about is that things disappear online easier than somehow in class. So that's why I highlighted this need to really write down in some document that you share with your students all the instructions, all the requirements. It is so helpful. And believe me, if you don't do this because you assume that people listen and understand, well, they do. But if you give them like 10 lines of requirements, it's impossible to even write it down. If you have it written in a document and you share this document with your students, you won't need to answer these questions many times, and you will get better quality later on. Yeah, and you can always refer people to this product. So that would be the first consideration. Of course, this goes into some kind of a folder, I imagine, on your LMS if you're there. Or, for example, if you don't use any learning management systems, such as the ones that I have mentioned, even a chat group on, whatever you use, WhatsApp, Facebook, Slack, will do, as long as you have these documents there. So that's the first thing. Well, and then there are other considerations which mostly correspond to how you organize presentations of different products, right? The fact that students are very often new to this concept of presenting online, even if it seems natural to us because we've been doing it as teachers, for some time now, students in many different situations, they are afraid of doing it. They may feel embarrassed. So good rehearsal, trying things out is really important because it makes them relaxed and not worrying about, sharing buttons and is my screen visible questions, right? That's important to rehearse.
I think one of the interesting points there that you make as well is like learning online, we need to be always much clearer, I think, in setting out tasks and giving those instructions in multiple modes, right? The other thing you just touched on as well is when you have those groups, based on my experience, some people are very nervous. There's always one person speaking. And this brings me to a question from Toto about, I know you're not going to talk too much about assessment, but how do you avoid that you only have that one person working? Because it should be a sort of assessment product for your whole group of students. Yes. Is there a way to manage that as a teacher?
Yeah, I do it in two ways, depending on the project and the students and actually the task. It's like this. You can assign particular roles to particular people. Usually when the group forms, 3 people, 4 people, larger groups don't really work well together. When the groups form, you can assign particular roles, or you let people choose the input that they'll be giving to the group. And then you evaluate and you assess them on that. But that's really tricky and difficult because it's almost impossible, or in other words, impractical, really to assess individual students' input. So I do it together. We do it, we assume it's a collective work and the whole group is assessed. But then what I do is I organize these reflection sessions and I give people a questionnaire. And in this, I ask, what was your role in the group? How many hours, how much have you worked to contribute to this task? And it's quite rare because, the group learns to control within the group if people are doing more or less the same share of work. What I found is that there are those perfectionists, people who rather dominate and want to do more because they want the project to be perfect. And this is the problem, yeah? Yes, but assessment in project work is that's a very interesting topic, and I really like it. And you know what I do? Just maybe because there's a webinar about it, I'll just say one thing. I do a lot of peer assessment, which is I invite other students, I create a rubric for them, and other students evaluate their peers. And I've always been, before doing that, I was worried that, this may be not fair or subjective, or how do you make sure that they give fair grades to point to other people? But they actually do. They actually do. I usually share 50-50, so 50% of the evaluation of the final score is mine and 50% comes from the group. But they feel really safe about the evaluation, so I think it works. And there is there is one more thing that helps with
one more thing then.
When they know that they'll be evaluating and they realize what it is that they will be asked to evaluate, this already improves the quality of their work. So
really the awareness making of those success criteria, right? What they need to do. I like what you say, because I always do with my projects as well. When we're presenting, they all have their little tick list to give feedback on language that was well used, or creativity, originality. And that gives it a real authenticity as well, right?
Oh yeah, that's true, definitely. I give really not much, I don't really evaluate people's language too much, especially at the beginning. I want them to get engaged. I rely on this, on the fact that for most of the projects that we do, that they will have a lot of exposure to authentic language, that they will need to read, understand, agree, disagree a lot about the particular choices they make and what to put into the work. And I show them, I really try to use language as a tool, to complete the work. It would not be fair if I was assessing accuracy, when what I want is an interesting idea for an ideal learning space. That's not the thing I want to do.
Yeah, I think it really depends on that aim as well, right? If you have a presentation class, which my class is often that, then they really need to think about, how do I actually say this, articulate and present myself?
Yeah, but that's a project in itself, right? But I will just add one more tip if I have like 20 seconds. And
You've got 20 seconds.
Because you started talking about it, Anna, and I want to kind of add something to it. The first lesson is the most important thing. You cannot give people a project and let them think about it for a week and then come back to it. What I do is I give them the project description, and during the first 20 minutes, the next 20 minutes, I ask people to form groups, think about it, and already have something that they can work on during the next week. It has to be immediate. And you need to help them with this beginning, because the beginning of the work is what makes people approach it more openly, right? Once they see that a couple of steps have been taken, that they already have the group, that they already have brainstormed something, it's just easier to continue, right? It's fresh, it's happening, and they own it.
And as well, they know in their little groups there will be support. So that's that competency feeling again, which is very motivating, I think.
Yeah.
Lovely. I think, Lukasz, we can sit here for another hour and talk about this because it was very interesting. You've got lots of great ideas. And looking at the chat box, everybody really enjoyed that session. So thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Good. I'm going to take everyone through the end of the webinar. And I want to say thank you as well to all the teachers who joined us today and have been so active in this chat box. Before I tell you a bit more about certificates, I'm very quickly going to show you another thing Macmillan has been doing. We've launched the Insights Index, which is a global research program run by Macmillan researchers. And it's working with teachers to find out what you need, what you want, what challenges there are, so we can really evolve in teaching practices and the materials that Macmillan creates. So if you haven't checked it out, please go to the website, macmillanenglish.com/insight-index, and you can register. You might get some questions once in a while. You get professional development, survey results, and also some white papers that you can download there to help you teach online at the moment.